All characters and events are fictional. Any resemblance is coincidental. And if you believe that every lie eventually leaves proof, stay with me. They thought the decision was final. That was the mistake. Not because they were wrong, but because they believed I would interrupt them. I didn't. I let them finish talking, because people reveal everything when they think you've already lost. The room smelled like money, not perfume, not flowers. Money. That clean, recycled air that only exists in places where deals are made quietly and consequences are outsourced. Polished wood, leather chairs, no clocks on the walls, no windows close enough to remind you there's a world outside, just a long table. 4 folders, and my future already printed in black ink. I didn't walk into that room expecting revenge. I walked in expecting confirmation, because by the time my family looked at me the way they did, with polite smiles, measured voices, and eyes already finished with me, I knew something important had already happened. I just didn't know how far it went yet. What I did know, whatever decision they believed they were making that night, it wasn't the end, it was the test, and tests have consequences. The room was warm, too warm, the kind of warmth that makes powerful people comfortable saying things they shouldn't. My father sat at the head of the table, as always, straight-backed, calm, hands folded like they were part of the furniture, the posture of a man who had never once been challenged in a room he paid for. To his right, my mother sat with her ankles crossed, expression neutral. That carefully practiced neutrality she used whenever she had already agreed with him, privately, before the conversation ever began, and across from me sat my sister, perfect posture, perfect hair, perfect confidence. She didn't look at me like a sister, she looked at me like an obstacle that had finally stopped moving. That should have been my first clue. "Ava," my father said gently, as if he were about to offer advice instead of exile. "Let's not make this emotional," that sentence. That exact sentence. In our family, it always meant the opposite. It meant a decision had already been made. I didn't speak. I waited. Because I'd learned something important over the years. People who rush to silence you are usually afraid of what you might say after they finish. "We've reviewed everything," he continued. "Your situation, your choices, your direction, that word again. It was the same word he'd used when I chose my career. When I moved out. When I stopped asking for approval. It always meant control." My sister smiled slightly, not kindly, not proudly, relieved. And that's when I understood something that made my stomach go cold. This wasn't about concern. It was about containment. They weren't trying to help me. They were trying to close me. My name is Ava Hart. I'm 36 years old, and for most of my life I've been described as the reasonable one, the calm one, the one who doesn't cause scenes, which is just another way of saying, she won't fight back. I work in corporate compliance, paper trails, signatures, internal controls, quiet investigations that only matter when someone's already in trouble. The kind of work that teaches you one brutal truth very early. If people rush a decision, it's because they don't want you reading the fine print. And my family? They had been rushing me my entire life. Especially now. My father cleared his throat and slid one of the folders toward me. Inside were documents I recognized immediately. Board minutes, ownership transfers, voting allocations, things I hadn't been invited to discuss, things that had already happened. "We've decided to restructure," he said calmly, "for the good of the company. And the family, the company, the one I had helped stabilize during its worst quarter, the one whose compliance gaps I'd quietly closed without ever putting his name at risk, the one my sister had never worked at a single day in her life." My sister leaned back in her chair, crossing her legs slowly, deliberately, like she'd practiced the motion in the mirror. "This is cleaner this way," she said. "Less conflict, less noise. That's what they really meant." My mother finally spoke. "You'll still be taken care of, Ava. Taken care of." Another phrase I recognized. It meant controlled without authority. They had already decided. They had already voted. They had already reassigned what they believed belonged to them. And they thought the hardest part would be convincing me. They were wrong. Because I wasn't there to argue. I was there to listen. I looked down at the folder in front of me. My name was printed neatly at the top, pages clipped, tabs marked, everything prepared without me ever being asked. A full decision, executed in advance. My father watched me carefully, measuring my silence. My sister mistook it for defeat. That was her second mistake. Ava, my father said again, softer this time. This doesn't have to be ugly. Ugly. That word people use when they're afraid of exposure. I nodded slowly, once. And that single movement seemed to relax them, because to them, a nod meant agreement. It meant surrender. It meant the end. They didn't know that while they were speaking. I was already rewinding, not emotionally, professionally, because something didn't sit right. Not the decision, the timing. And timing in my world is everything. I didn't argue. That was the part that unsettled them later, though they didn't realize it yet. I closed the folder carefully, not fast, not slow, carefully enough to signal respect. My father nodded, satisfied. My sister exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for weeks. They thought my silence meant acceptance. What it actually meant was that I had started counting. I stood up first, not dramatically, just calmly pushing my chair back. If that's everything, I said evenly, I'll review this and get back to you. My father smiled, the smile of a man who believes the conversation is already over. There's nothing to review, he said. This has already been approved. Approved. That word again. I smiled back. Of course, I said. I just like to read. That should have been my third clue. The way my sister's smile flickered. Just for half a second. Because people who rush you hate readers. I left the house without another word. The same house I'd grown up in. The same driveway where my father had taught me how to park perfectly straight. The same front door that had always felt like a boundary more than an entrance. I sat in my car for a full minute before starting the engine. Not because I was emotional, because I was replaying the meeting, word by word, tone by tone. My father had been calm, too calm. My mother hadn't defended me, predictable. But my sister, she'd been prepared. That's what bothered me. Not confident, prepared. As if she already knew exactly how the conversation would go. As if she'd rehearsed her relief. That night I didn't cry. I opened my laptop. I logged into systems I hadn't touched in months, because while my family believed they were removing me from the company, they'd forgotten one small detail. I hadn't been fired. I'd been reassigned. And reassignment doesn't revoke access immediately. In compliance, timing matters. Access windows matter. And mistakes don't disappear just because people wish they would. I started with the board minutes. The ones my father had slid across the table so confidently. The formatting was correct. The signatures looked clean. But something about the timestamps felt off. Too uniform, too perfect. I cross-checked them against internal logs, then against email headers, then against the calendar records tied to the board members. And that's when I saw it. A gap, not a dramatic one, a quiet one. A meeting that supposedly happened. Without any corresponding digital trace, no room reservation, no call log, no access swipe, just a clean PDF declaring it had occurred. I leaned back in my chair, not smiling, not panicking, just still, because fake meetings are the oldest trick in the book, and they only work when no one checks the room. I kept going. Transfer approvals, ownership reallocations, voting weight shifts, everything technically valid, but legally fragile, because the authority used to approve them, mine, my digital credentials, my compliance clearance, my name, and I knew for a fact I hadn't approved any of it. That's when the room felt very quiet. Not the kind of quiet that comes with loneliness. The kind that comes when you realize someone made a very big assumption. They assumed I wouldn't look. They assumed I wouldn't audit my own removal. They assumed silence meant ignorance, but silence in my profession means preparation. I pulled a fresh notebook from my drawer, the one I only use when something matters. At the top of the page, I wrote one sentence. They didn't remove me, they used me. The next morning, my sister called. I let it ring. Then she texted, "Just checking in. Hope you're okay." I stared at the screen for a long moment, then typed back, "I'm fine. Just reviewing." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "There's nothing to review, Ava." There it was again. That urgency. I smiled to myself, because urgency is panic wearing a polite mask. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened the internal compliance archive, the one no one ever thinks to lock, because it's boring, it's tedious, it's full of old reports no one wants to read, unless you know exactly what you're looking for. I searched my own name, hundreds of results, most routine, but buried deep, 3 years back, was a flagged report that had been marked resolved without final documentation, a governance override, initiated by my father, finalized by me. Only one problem. I'd been on a plane that day. I checked the boarding pass, timestamp, seat number, gate, proof. Someone had used my credentials while I was in the air. Someone who had access. Someone who knew exactly when I'd be unreachable. My stomach tightened, not in fear, in clarity. This wasn't a sudden decision. This wasn't about protecting the company. This was a long plan. And that meant 2 things. 1, they hadn't just decided to remove me now. They'd been preparing for this moment for years. And 2, if they were willing to falsify records once, they'd done it before, which meant the problem wasn't me losing control. It was them losing containment. That evening, my father called. I answered this time. "Ava," he said warmly, "I trust you've had time to process." Process. Another favorite word. "Yes," I said. "I have." A pause, then good. "Because we'd like to finalize things quickly." "Quickly. Of course. I just have a few questions," I said. The silence on the other end told me everything. Questions were not part of the script. "What kind of questions?" he asked carefully. "Procedural ones," I replied. "About authorization." Another pause. Longer. "Well," he said, forcing a light chuckle, "that's all been handled." I smiled. "Has it?" I asked. The line went quiet, and in that silence, I knew. They didn't know yet, but they were about to. I didn't confront them. Not yet. That's the mistake people make when they finally see the crack in the wall. They rush to push. I didn't push. I stepped back. Because when something has been hidden carefully for years, the truth doesn't sit on the surface. It hides behind routines, habits, confidence. I needed to understand how they thought. So I stopped looking at documents and started looking at behavior. My father had always been methodical, slow decisions, heavy deliberation. He hated surprises. My sister, on the other hand, she loved momentum. She thrived when things moved fast, which meant this wasn't his timing. This was hers. The more I replayed that dinner, the clearer it became. The way she sat, already relaxed. The way she didn't argue or persuade. The way she simply waited for the verdict. She hadn't been hoping for the decision. She'd been expecting it. That night I drove past the office. Not inside, just past it. The building was dark except for one floor, her floor. I didn't stop. I didn't park. I just noted it. The next morning, I called in a favor. Not a big one. A quiet one. A former colleague who now worked in internal systems auditing. Someone who understood discretion. "I need historical access logs," I said. "No alerts, no flags, just timestamps." There was a pause. "Then that's risky." "I know," I replied. "That's why I'm asking you." Another pause. "Then, which department?" I didn't hesitate. "Executive compliance." Silence. Then a slow exhale. "I can give you 30 minutes," she said. After that, I pretend this call never happened. That's all I need. When the data came through, I didn't scroll. I searched one thing, after-hours access, and there it was. A pattern, late nights, weekend logins, always brief, always precise, and always from the same badge. My sister's she'd been working quietly for years, not building something new, rewriting something old, layer by layer, approval by approval, using my credentials as insulation. Because if anything went wrong, it wouldn't lead back to her. It would lead to me. That's when I realized the decision at dinner hadn't been the end. It had been the cleanup. They weren't removing me from the company. They were removing me from the records, reassigning liability, rewriting responsibility, and positioning her as the future. I closed my laptop slowly, not angry, focused, because the most dangerous part of a plan like this is the moment it thinks it's finished. That afternoon, I did something deliberate. I made a mistake, a visible one. I sent an email, brief, polite, to my father. I've reviewed the documents. I have concerns about the authorization timeline, but I trust this can be clarified. I waited exactly 40 minutes later. My sister called, not my father, her, that told me everything. "Ava," she said softly, "you're overthinking this." Overthinking, her favorite word. "It's all standard procedure." "I'm sure it is," I replied. A pause. "You don't need to dig into old things," she added. "That only complicates matters." "Old things." I smiled. "I like context," I said. She exhaled, barely. "But I heard it. You always did," she replied. "That's why this is hard for you." Hard. Another loaded word. This wasn't a warning. It was a test, to see if I'd back off. I didn't. Instead, I asked something simple. "Did you ever log in under my credentials?" Silence, longer than before. Then a laugh, light, dismissive. "That's ridiculous." I didn't argue. I just said, "Okay," and hung up. That night, I prepared. Not evidence yet, not confrontation, leverage. I pulled everything, every approval tied to my credentials, every document finalized during times I couldn't have been present. Flights, conferences, medical appointments, anything that proved I wasn't there. Then I did something most people wouldn't think to do. I printed it, because digital evidence can be questioned. Paper is harder to erase. I organized it into one folder, thick, unassuming, not labeled, just complete. The next invitation came 2 days later. A follow-up meeting, neutral tone, professional, scheduled quickly, too quickly. They thought they were closing a loose end. What they didn't know was that I'd already stepped past it. I arrived early, sat alone at the table, hands folded, calm. The door opened. My father entered first, confident, then my mother, then my sister. She looked at the folder in front of me. Her eyes paused, just a fraction too long, and in that moment, I knew. She recognized it, not the contents, the weight. Because when you've spent years hiding something, you learn to recognize the shape of exposure. My father sat down, cleared his throat. "We'd like to resolve this today," he said. I nodded. "So would I." He smiled, the kind that expects surrender. And that's when my sister leaned forward slightly. "Ava," she said gently, "before this goes any further." I looked at her. And for the first time, I interrupted. "No," I said calmly. "Before you go any further." I slid the folder forward. Not fast, not aggressive, just enough for everyone to see it. And I said the one sentence that changed the room. "I know how long this has been happening." The silence that followed wasn't polite. It wasn't controlled. It was fragile. My sister didn't speak. My mother didn't move. My father's smile froze. Not gone, just misaligned. And for the first time since this started, they realized the test wasn't over. They had passed judgment, but the verdict hadn't been delivered yet. No one spoke. That silence didn't happen because they were shocked. It happened because they were calculating. My father's eyes moved first, not to me, to the folder. My sister didn't blink. That was new. She had always been good at masking emotion, but blinking was her tell. When she didn't blink, it meant she was already losing control. "Ava," my father said carefully, "you're making assumptions." I nodded. "That's what I thought too," I said. At first, I opened the folder. Slowly, not to the first page, to the middle. I placed one document on the table. Just one. A printed access log, time-stamped, authenticated, highlighted. My sister inhaled sharply. Just once. My father leaned forward. "What is this?" he asked. I didn't answer him. I looked at her. "That login happened while I was on a flight," I said calmly. "You signed off on a compliance override using my credentials." She laughed. "Too fast." "That doesn't prove anything," she said. "People share access all the time." I tilted my head. "They don't," I replied. "When biometric confirmation is required." My father stiffened, because he knew. The company had implemented biometric verification 3 years earlier, the same year the pattern began. I placed a second document down, then a third, then a fourth, each one heavier than the last. My mother finally spoke. "Ava, why are you doing this?" That question. Not "what are you saying?" Not "is this true?" "Why are you doing this?" I looked at her. "Because you were going to let it happen," I said. Her lips pressed together. My sister leaned back in her chair, still smiling, but now the smile had cracks. "This is dramatic," she said. "You always love drama." I didn't argue. I slid the final document forward, a forensic summary, prepared quietly, independently, legally. It showed approval chains rerouted, liability reassigned, responsibility transferred, and my name positioned as the final signer. Every risk, every exposure, pointed at me. Silence, real silence. My father's voice dropped. "This would destroy the company," he said. I nodded again. "Yes," I said. "That's why you didn't want me reading the fine print." My sister stood, slowly. "You're bluffing," she said. I looked up at her. "No," I replied. "I waited." She laughed again, but this time, her voice shook. "You wouldn't do this," she said. "Not to your own family." That was the moment, the exact moment, when I understood something crucial. She still thought this was emotional, that it was about betrayal, or hurt, or resentment. She hadn't realized yet that this wasn't personal. It was structural. I closed the folder. Then I did something they didn't expect. I stood up, not in anger, not to leave, just to change the angle. "I didn't come here to accuse you," I said. "I came to finish something." My father looked confused. "Finish what?" I met his eyes. "The test." My sister's smile vanished. Completely. "What test?" she asked. I answered quietly. "The one you started the night you decided I was disposable." I walked to the end of the table, turned, and faced all of them. "You thought the decision was final," I said, "so I let you finish talking." My father's voice was barely a whisper. "What do you want?" That question, the last refuge of people who've lost control. I didn't answer immediately. I let the silence stretch. Then I said, "I want my name removed from every authorization." My sister shook her head. "That's impossible." I smiled. "It isn't," I said. "You already know that." She did. Her eyes dropped. I continued, "And I want a written acknowledgement," I added, "that any action taken under my credentials was not authorized by me." My father exhaled slowly. "And if we refuse?" I looked at him. "Then the next meeting won't be private. No shouting, no threats, just reality." They knew what that meant. My sister sat down, hard. The confidence was gone. The posture collapsed. She stared at the documents, like they were radioactive. My mother looked away. My father nodded once. "We'll comply," he said. And just like that, it was over. Not with drama, with surrender. The changes were filed that afternoon, quietly, legally, irreversibly. My sister resigned within a week, officially by choice, unofficially. Exposed. The company survived, barely. My father never apologized. He didn't need to. His silence said enough, and I walked away. Not disowned, not defeated, just finished. People think power comes from shouting. It doesn't. Power comes from letting people believe they've won. Long enough to expose themselves. They thought the decision was final. They were wrong. I let them finish talking, and then I ended it, because every lie leaves proof.